Hello everyone, my name is Jane Nicholson-Biff. I'm the Event Manager for the Institute of Leadership and Management. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, and I'd like to introduce Kate Cooper, Head of Research Policy and Standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management. Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Jane. My pleasure today to introduce Anne-Marie Annes to you. She's going to be talking about managing upwards. It's funny with leadership development, we often focus so much on managing downwards that we forget how important that relationships are with all colleagues, but particularly perhaps our boss. Anne-Marie is a learning advisor with the Global Investment Bank Citi and is responsible for setting the global strategy for early career induction learning across the whole Citi franchise. She's also an experienced coach and a facilitator for all sorts of leadership development. Anne-Marie has a PhD in neuroscience of learning and memory and is particularly interested in applying this knowledge in an organisational context to support strategic growth through people and the management of them. So thanks very much today for joining us, Anne-Marie, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for that introduction. So my name is Anne-Marie Annes, and as Kate very kindly introduced, I'm a learning advisor, and I'm very interested in how we use our knowledge and our leadership skills from an organisational setting. And I've been working at Citi for a number of years in that side, looking after particularly those in their early career. So I'm really happy to be here today and to speak to you about managing upwards. As Kit said, very, very interesting and important topic that sometimes gets a little overlooked. So something I'm very, very passionate about myself. So just as a very quick introduction to the series, for those of you who maybe are less familiar, so the Institute of Leadership and Management has identified 5 separate dimensions of leadership. Namely, they are achievement, ownership, collaboration, authenticity, and vision. And there's a series of 49 webinars that are being set up by the Institute, and each webinar focuses on a component of one of these 5 dimensions. Essentially, I suppose, highlighting the learning that should be done in relation to those as you think through your own personal leadership development. So one of the dimensions that we're going to be looking at today is ownership. And when we think about ownership, great leaders, they tend to take responsibility for their actions and for their interactions. They show that ownership of their own goals, they show initiative, great decision making, problem solving, and taking that commitment and reliability to the next step as well. And that's all part of this dimension of owning your leadership and taking that ownership as part of that. And for today, as we said, we're going to be focusing on a particular dimension of that, which is managing upwards. So, managing upwards as a concept, I suppose, what do we mean by that? So when we think of management and influencing in the work situation, we do tend to think of this as a linear piece and thinking of it as a top-down element where we are managers, we have subordinates that we manage on a day-to-day basis to get our work done. And it's a traditional view of leadership. But when we look at effective leadership and leaders who are successful in reaching their goals and leading others, they really show ownership by building strong relationships with all their colleagues in a kind of a 360. So not just those that they manage directly, but with their peers, with their managers, managers, and others who are kind of in that sphere in their organisation. And it's really important that trust and that strong relationship is a really important aspect of their success as leaders. So when we think about that, and we think of it as a leadership as a 360 rather than a top-down process, it brings into question this idea of how do we manage and influence those not only below us in a hierarchical level, but actually all around us, those peers and maybe managers with whom we may not have authority, but still need to be able to influence to manage our goals as leaders. So today we're going to look at managing upwards in 3 different aspects. So we're going to start with talking about your boss and how you can look at specifically managing them. Then we'll look at a concept of followership. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a growing concept, and we'll go delve into that a little bit. And then we will go into what's known as co-creation, and that's again a slightly novel, different way of looking at leadership, which helps us think about this management and this influencing piece in a holistic way. So when we think about the first aspect, which is managing the boss, the single most important person to your career and your career success is your manager. It's often your manager. And they can have a real impact on where you go, what your next step will be, what opportunities go in front of you, and how you are portrayed to others in the organisation as you think about your own development of your leadership and maybe your career progression. So that relationship is really integral to your success as a leader. And when we think about the traditional relationships that we would have had with bosses, it was about command and control, it was about micromanagement, it was about, the manager being on top of a hierarchy and delivering instructions down, usually in a fairly rigid plan around their own goals, and not really kind of thinking about that more holistically. But nowadays we know, that much more effective leadership can be seen when it's based on a relationship, and it's a bit more of a dynamic process. For everybody who's trying to achieve the goals together, to have the macro view and the big picture to what you're trying to achieve, is really important. The need for motivating people and allowing inspiration and innovation to happen. These are all changing how we work with our managers and how we can interact with them. Definitely for the better, in a way that is much more empowering and much more adaptive and useful in today's working environment. So when we think about managing our boss, we're kind of trying to move from this hierarchical notion of our boss being above us and us being below them. It's kind of thinking it a little bit more as a holistic partnership and in that leadership relationship. So as we think about our manager as one of those key elements of our success as a leader, it's really important as you develop that relationship with them to be able to understand where they're coming from. So to be able to see where their vision is and what's underlying that. And what will happen is if you can get to the bottom of that, if you can get yourself into your boss's shoes and understand what they're trying to achieve, then you can actually engage that and frame that in your interactions with your manager to help them see that by helping you, that you will help them. And it's kind of that dual piece. And that's really the crux of how you can get to the bottom of that managing upwards piece, where you have a really dynamic, good relationship with your boss, and both of you are helping each other to achieve the goals in the broader sense from a leadership perspective and whatever goals it is that you're trying to achieve. So there's 4 priorities. So the first piece, in order to understand that and to get your boss's vision and to understand where they're coming from, you need to stop and observe. So think about what messages come across in your interactions with them on a day-to-day basis, reading through their emails, what are the pieces that they pull out when you're in team meetings, what are the key things that they are raising as issues, as things that they're particularly interested in, that they're questioning about. You can do that yourself by observing them, but you can also speak to colleagues and peers who work with them and say, when you're dealing with this person, what do you think are their priorities? What is your experience of what's important for them? And then you can actually speak to your boss. You can sit to them and say, look, I want to be able to work with you and help us all reach our goals. What are the things that keep you awake at night? What are the things that are really important priorities for you? And by doing that kind of rounded observation, it really helps you get a good vision and view as to the drivers and the priorities that are driving what your manager is doing, what they're trying to do and what they're expecting of you. And what that will allow you to do then is to start changing your language and framing what you're doing with them to communicate in a way that really makes sense to them. So they know that if you're working on a project and you need their support for X, Y, Z, if you can say, look, I need your support, and if I can do that, if we reach my goal, then that means that we're exponentially the way along the goal to help you with the issue you've already told me you have. That really helps them to kind of to be brought in and helps you to really influence them and have them on board as you both work together. So that's the concept, I suppose, of it. your manager will then see you as a source of help, as a source of solution. If you come to them with solutions framed around their own challenges, it can really, really help and be very, very effective as you develop that relationship. That was the first one. The second is the concept of followership. Now, again, a little bit of a funny one to get your head around if we think about what we've always taken for granted as leadership being that top-down piece. If we think of leadership as a dynamic interaction between leaders and followers, it'll help us along the way to understand this. So there's no such thing as a leader without followers, right? And I suppose traditionally it was taken for granted if you're a leader, people did as you said. But there's this new growing body of evidence that it's actually just as important to focus on the followers as it is on the leaders when you're looking at the overall leadership landscape. So how you are as a leader will determine the type of people that will follow you, that you can bring along with you to see your leadership vision. And understanding that and understanding the dynamics of these followers will help you to really grow that and nurture the type of follower that you need to support yourself as a leader. Likewise, as yourself, you will have leaders, and as you are thinking about your own leadership and influencing upwards and trying to influence your own leaders, think about the type of follower you want to be to engage with them in a way that will help you with that leadership. So it's kind of that concept of thinking about the followership alongside and hand in hand with leadership to look at that whole journey. So there's a piece of research I'll just go through briefly by UBN et al. In 2014. There's a lot of research. This goes back to, you'll see in your references to Robert Kelly in 1988 and stuff that he started off. But it's looking at followers in terms of five different categories and looking at them on an index between how engaged they are with their leader and the level of independent critical thinking that they tend to do. So you would starting off in the top left-hand corner, we have people who we would call alienated. And these are people who would tend to not be very engaged with a leader. They're not necessarily helping them out. They're kind of sitting back passively, and they can often be quite critical, overly critical maybe, and not in a helpful way to the leader. And these people we would see as kind of alienated individuals. They're quite difficult. They can be quite resistant to leadership and very difficult to work with. In the bottom half of this diagram, we have passive and conformist, and both of these are kind of two sides of something similar. So people who would fall into these categories would tend to kind of follow the leader, whatever they do. And our passive people will do it in a sheep mentality, so they kind of don't want to engage, not really interested. I'll do whatever I need to do for a quiet life, or just follow what everybody else is doing and not really think about it. The conformist side are those who similarly will kind of just be swayed very easily by whatever the leader wants to do, but maybe are more engaged with it. So they're what we would call our yes people. So people who will say yes and do whatever they're told. So even though actually underneath it all, they're not really engaged, they're not really bought in. They will just do what they need to say to kind of have an easier way of it. The top right hand corner is what we're particularly interested in, which would be those that we call effective followers. And this is the quadrant you want to be thinking about in terms of, as a leader, how you want to try and move your followers into and encourage them to go into this quadrant. Then also as you engage up with your leaders where you want to sit. And effective people will be people who are actively engaged with the leader. They're really interested in understanding the vision, understanding where you need to go, but also are able to apply that independent thinking, aren't going to follow like sheep, are going to challenge where you need to be challenged, but in a positive way, and in a way that helps the leaders kind of meet their goals. So that's the kind of effective leadership, and that's the gold area, I think, that you want to be focusing on. You do have that fifth one, which is the Pragmatic Survivor, which is somebody who kind of sits on the fence between everything for an easy life. And again, those other four, they tend to be much more of a hindrance to leadership. So while the passive performance on the front, the face of it might look like they're easy to lead because they will just say yes to everything, really, if you're trying to be effective and you're trying to drive change, you really need people who are engaged and who are able to challenge and make you think differently as a leader too. So that's the concept of a good follower, summarised there. That collaborative thinking, the critical thinking, able to stand up and showing that commitment to their leader as well. Okay, the third concept is co-creation, and this concept is about when we think about a brainstorming situation. You have a problem that needs to be solved. You've got lots of different people coming in with different backgrounds and experience, and no one person maybe has the right solution, but everybody coming together and gathering that knowledge together helps to come to bring a solution out that maybe they wouldn't have. No one person would have come up with by themselves. That's the concept behind co-creation, and it can be very empowering, especially when you're thinking about that managing upwards piece as you interact with your leaders. If you're in this co-creative atmosphere where you can contribute just as much as someone else, it can really help with your influence as well. The reason why co-creation has come around has been a combination of what we've covered now, up until now, which is that changing relationship, the more complex and dynamic business environments that we live in nowadays. Technology and internet is making the world smaller. It's bringing our companies together. It's making us work differently. And there's also a lot more education. There's very educated employees out there, and everybody brings their experience to the table. So all of these factors come together in a really nice way to help to facilitate this co-creative relationship. And by using this co-creation kind of approach, it allows you to be more adaptable to the market changes, to technology. It brings much more flexible and organic interactions in the organisation. You know, it helps you enable and empower people as well, and kind of brings that responsibility to everybody. So there's less needing for monitoring and feeling that need for that top-down kind of control. So it's really shown to be very beneficial. And also as a leader, you know, it helps you to empower those that you work with, to really focus on getting people to up their knowledge and train. It helps that kind of bottom-up processing, and it's just a much more holistic and variable way of working with different people, different styles, different experiences, to try and build that in and really give yourself a strong base for your leadership. So those are the main concepts. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our time as well, and I want to allow questions if anybody has some. So just as a quick summary, when we think about managing upwards, it's more, we need to focus more on understanding than being understood. And it's a common mistake made where we get that backwards and we come from our own internal place. In fact, for us to be effective, we need to think about the bigger picture and how we can use that knowledge. And tuning into your boss, how that can really help you. And if you do that properly in a very interactive, trustworthy, communicative way and dynamic relationship. Again, thinking about how they want to communicate, taking that initiative. These are all very positive ways for you to engage as a follower or as a leader, and bring that influencing upwards as well. And again, all of this helps you to think about things from that bigger picture and that your boss's vision as well. Some don'ts. So don't make it look like you're manipulating your boss. That's not what this is about. This is about an honest, trustworthy relationship. It's about sitting with them and having that mutual trust. If you help each other, you will both reach your goals. So it's not about manipulating, and your boss shouldn't feel like you're coming in trying to do that or you're looking for something for them. This should be a two-way dynamic relationship. It's tempting to cover up mistakes, but again, part of that trust is to go to your boss and say, look, you know that stuff we talked about, I've tried it, I made a mistake, it didn't work out, can we stop and start? I think again, maybe do a little bit of co-creation, think about it all and come up with a solution and start again. That momentary pain of saying, okay, we've made a mistake, is far better than letting something drag out and damaging that relationship and damaging that trust, which means you can't actually have that relationship and manage upwards in the right way anymore. So those are just some key things. I'm going to just leave you with a final word from Dr. Bob Nelson. That employees' motivation is a direct result of the sum of the interactions with his or her manager. So what I was saying at the beginning, they can be the single most important person to your career and to your leadership journey. And using that properly and using that knowledge, you will see that most effective leaders have really gotten to that managing upwards piece and really got that relationship with the manager to the right place. Some really interesting references here. You will have copies of these slides sent out, so you should get these again. And some of the research on followership, and Kelly, if you're interested, that's really interesting, an interesting area, and they're good reads. But that's all there. And that's it. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to I'm not sure if it's Kate or Jane for questions.
Thank you ever so much, Anne-Marie. That was really interesting. And we have some questions. The first one is, what advice do you have if your manager is not as motivated or indeed as competent as you are?
Okay. Well, what I would say is it's a difficult situation, right? And it's going to be depending on each individual, and that's where you come from. But there's still a crux. So if you're saying that they're not as motivated, they're not as competent as you, and yet they're still going to be impactful on where you go, right? No matter whether you like it or not, they have a big say on what you do next because they are your manager. So what I would say is you need to try and get to the bottom of that relationship and figure out, put aside your opinions as to whether they're competent or motivated, and get down to the crux of, at the end of the day, they have something that they need to achieve. Figure out what that is and help them with that, and try and not let personal kind of feelings, I suppose, get in the way. So if they're not, they will have a manager that they have to answer to. So if you can figure out what that is and work with them on it, it'll help you both. And it's the best way to do it. So you need to kind of park the feelings of whether they're motivated and actually just get to the bottom of what are they trying to achieve. If you can sit down with anybody and say, I can make your job easier by you help me with this particular project, that's always going to help with that piece as well. And you never know, that kind of honest conversation could really help both of you to kind of work together better.
Thank you. We have a question here. What about if your relationship with your boss really has broken down? Should you go above them to their boss?
It's a difficult one. Again, I think that's probably, again, I don't know even if that's a question about the managing upwards piece. I think that, if you're having trouble with your boss, you do probably need to get some sort of mediation in there. And if that's going above them or working with a peer maybe, and otherwise you do need to be careful, because again, if you're trying to build trust with your boss, you don't want to go above them and make them look like they're getting in trouble. What I would just say is try and have an honest conversation with them, and hope that professionalism will win out, right? And if you both sit down and say, look, I know we have difficult relationships, I know we don't see eye to eye, but we both have to get this done. How can we work together? I think that's going to be a much more effective way. Call it out and have an open conversation about it, than doing something that's going to maybe get their back up and destroy that trust even further.
Thanks very much. And we have a question here, which is really about helping your staff manage you. So when people are new to work, we all focus on early leadership, and it's all about me, the leader, learning how to lead, learning about how managing people. How do you help your new staff, perhaps new into the organisation, new to you? How do you help? What would you do to make sure that they manage you well?
So again, I think this is where the idea around your followership piece, actually followership and co-creation in a way, both work really well here. So if you think of these new people coming in, they need to feel empowered and they need to feel that they're able to have a say. So they may not feel, they may not realize that you're open to them guiding you as a leader, for example. So it's probably the first piece is around trying to develop an environment in your team where people understand that you are open to criticism, as long as it's a constructive criticism, you're open to suggestions. So I would try and find ways to really make that clear to your team. And those who come in new, they'll learn that fairly quickly because their peers will tell them. And if you've gotten that relationship and that atmosphere in your team, it will really grow, that empowerment. And the concept around the co-creation as well, again, having sessions where you get everybody in to do a brainstorm and say, I need all of you in this room, it helps to nurture that environment and that atmosphere in the team. So I'd say it's just by action, by showing them. Yeah.
And here's a question. You did mention sucking up as one of the don'ts, but do you think that some people really are more keen to suck up than they are to really challenge ideas and make their own suggestions?
I think so. They're probably down in that one of those lower quadrants that we were talking about. The yes people probably, right? They will get their boss a cup of coffee and say yes, 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 but not necessarily contribute. That's part and parcel. Every workplace has different people, and they're there. The challenge for you is to decide how much, what that you want to go into, and who, as a leader, being conscious and aware of that, so that you could be much more informed as you interact with those people.
Gosh, we've got lots of questions coming in today. Do you think that the same principles apply when you're managing upwards, but almost diagonally upwards? So it's other people's managers, across the departments. Any special advice there?
I think it's all very similar, right? You're talking about this idea of managing upwards might be a little bit of a misnomer, because what we're talking about is managing 360, right? So the managing down is established. We know it. We have lots of training on that. But you can manage laterally. You've got peers. So say if you have a project that you need to have done, and it relies on your peer in another department doing their piece, that you need to be able to influence them, even though you have no authority over them. Likewise, your boss's boss may have something that you need, and you need to work with them. So it's about the concept works for all of them. It's about thinking about these relationships not linearly and not in the hierarchy, but as a dynamic leadership, followership, interactive relationship and partnership, so that everybody can achieve the goals that they want to achieve.
Do you think we spend enough time teaching or developing or training followership?
I don't think so. I think it's not actually a new concept. As I said, some of the work we were talking about today goes back to 1988, but it's something that has taken a while for people to figure out. But there are some really good, actually, videos on YouTube around followership, which is around that whole element of a leader is only as good as their followers. And it is something that's growing, and we certainly don't do enough of it. And it's certainly a concept when I raise it with people, it takes a little bit of description and forward and back before people really understand what we mean by it. But I think it's getting there. I think it's something that we should continue to try and push as much as we can as we think about leadership. Yeah, it could certainly do a little bit more love.
So is followership, which is the more difficult? We've had a question, which would you say, working on your followership or working on your leadership?
They're both difficult, but actually I don't tend to divide the two, because I think followership is, so I think they're two intertwined for us to be even able to divide, because I would see followership as a key part of leadership, and both of their challenges. But if you kind of think of it in that way, you should find it easier to actually build both of them.
So thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Kate, and thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. On behalf of the Institute of Leadership and Management and our presenters, thank you very much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.